Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Office Hours with Steve Tweed, and we're happy to have you with us on this May the 7th, 2020. And we're really coming together to talk a little bit about how home care companies are coping with COVID-19. And I think this is our 5th week of coming together on Thursday afternoons at 4 p.m. with our clients, our customers, our friends, our newsletter readers from home care companies all across the U.S. And a couple of highlights that we want to focus on today to bring you up to date on what we know and also find out what you know if you've gotten some new and different information. One of the hot topics of the COVID crisis, of course, is the Paycheck Protection Program. And as we've worked with our mastermind members the last couple of weeks, it seems like a significant number of home care companies have in fact applied and received funding. We're going to do a little poll here in a few minutes. We're learning this technology of Zoom and doing virtual meetings, so we're going to do a little polling and give you an opportunity to have some input. A couple of pieces of news. I don't know if you saw it, but today there was a notice that came out, I guess it was dated yesterday, May the 6th, that the safe harbor deadline for repayment of Paycheck Protection Plan loans was extended from today, May the 7th, to next week, May the 14th. And this is reminding borrowers to review carefully the certification required for the PPP loans that says that, quote, current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant in providing that safe harbor. And we've been having this conversation about, is it necessary under this term in quotes, given that many home care companies have endured reasonably well under the difficult situation. So we're going to keep up to date and learn more about that. We do want to do a quick poll and find out who among our office hour participants has applied. So I'm going to stop my share, and Jill's going to share her screen and bring up the poll. And if you just take a minute and pick an option here, and we will take a quick look and see who has applied. So the question is, have you applied for and been funded by the Paycheck Protection Program? And there's 5 choices there. So just take a moment and click a choice. Those of you just joining us, we've got a poll up on the screen to find out who has applied for and been funded by the Paycheck Protection Program. You just click on the little dot there and we'll see the participants. We've got 70% of the people in the room have voted so far.
I think that includes us too, so.
Okay.
Just maybe. Oh no, it does 7 out of 10. It does not count the hosts, so.
Okay.
Good to know.
All right.
So, oh, we have one on the phone, so it may not be able to.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and end the polling there. And
Okay.
Can you show us the results there, Jill?
I can.
Okay, so we see that 86% of our participants applied for and were funded in the first round, 14% applied for and were funded in the second round, and that ends up 100. So everybody here has been participating in that program, so that makes what we're talking about today significantly relevant.
Okay.
So we go back to the slides, and the Home Care Association of America did a similar survey a week and a half ago, and they just sent me the results today. And in their case, 91% of their people who participated in their survey had applied for the loan, and 48% had in fact been funded. Now this is a week and a half old, so I don't know if that's different yet. So among the folks that we are working with in our mastermind groups and in our one-on-one coaching work, a majority of people have been funded and received their money. Out there in the broad general universe of home care, a little less than half. Just a couple of highlights. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. I think everybody is pretty much familiar with the basic requirements of the payroll protection plan of applying through your local bank and being able to use that money to pay for payroll costs, utility, rent, and mortgage, and that 75% of the money has to be spent on payroll and payroll related costs. One of the things that we've been talking about is the requirement to maintain employment levels for the 8 weeks as compared to two potential comparison periods. One comparison period is February the 15th, 2019 to June the 30th, 2019, and the other comparison period is January 1, 2020 to February 29th, 2020. Seems like a lot of people are using the 2019 comparison period. The other question that has come up about this is with regard to maintaining headcount. And so we've been doing some additional research to try to understand what we should be doing to prepare for forgiveness, and looking at a number of CPA firms and law firms that have put out guidance. I've just identified some quick bullet points. So here are some things that experts are recommending that we do, and we'll hear from some of our participant members to add to this as we complete this piece of it. So what should participants do? We're hearing advice: create a separate checking account in your bank to hold those funds so that you have accurate record of the funds coming in and the funds going out. Create separate charge code for costs incurred. So going into your chart accounts in your financial system and setting up specific codes for those costs, and I guess they could be subcodes of like payroll and rent, utilities, and so on. Keeping clear records of forgivable loan payments, and setting up a situation where you have an invoice and a record of the payment for rent, for utilities, for those kinds of things. They're recommending operating the segregated account and moving the funds from your segregated account into your payment account in the exact amount that was being paid. So you have an invoice, you move the money from the operating account into the payment account, and then you pay the bill and you have a record, a check, or an ACH statement. Here's one of the things we talked about in our mastermind Monday mastermind meeting this past week, was being prepared to run an off-cycle payroll, because the law requires that we pay bills that were incurred and paid during that 8-week period. And the 8-week period starts from the day the money was deposited in your account. So we had an interesting conversation about what it would take, particularly for larger companies, to set up to run an off-cycle payroll. We also need to keep clear records, contemporaneous records of employees hired back. So if caregivers weren't accepting shifts, then they came back on, or if office staff left and then came back on. For most of us, that's not a big issue, because we didn't lose people and then bring them back. With like the restaurants had people that they lost, and then when they got the PPP money, they brought them back. In our case, most of us didn't lose employees. However, I think where this head count and FTE count is going to come into play is if we, through our normal turnover numbers, if we lost caregivers, are we able to replace them? And so we're putting new emphasis on caregiver recruiting and retention during this time. And then the experts are recommending that we talk with our lenders about the anticipated forgiveness process and find out exactly when they expect to have their process and discussion and documentation requirements made available. So those are some of the specific things that we need to do. I know a number of you have already talked about that and have moved in that direction. Just a couple of things that fall into the category of what else should a recipient know. Obviously staying on top of the changes and developments on a day-to-day basis, and we're doing that and you're doing that, so that makes sense. The CARES Act requires lenders to make decisions on forgiveness within 60 days of the applicant's request. And so once this gets clear and we make the request for forgiveness, the bank has to tell us within 60 days if they're going to forgive it. I think that's going to be interesting, particularly with some of the larger banks that may or may not have the processes in place to process these forgiveness requests and get back to people. And I'm going to ask Glenn to comment on that in a moment, because I know, Glenn, you work with one of the big banks and then moved to a smaller bank. We'll get your input on that.
Yeah.
The other unknown, and this is quite interesting, it's unknown whether the upcoming advice or guidance from SBA will in fact be additional guidance, or will it simply be a more transparent outline of the process. So we were hoping that we would get that guidance today. It's supposed to be here by the end of the week. We haven't gotten it yet. Will it really be more clear guidance? Another point is that all PPP loans of $2 million or greater will be audited. And here's another note that suggests that loans over $350,000 should expect ongoing scrutiny. As of May 1st, 2020, less than 1% of loans were over $1 million. 2.66% of loans were between $350,000 and $1 million, and the average loan size was $79,000. So those are some sort of highlights of what else we need to know about all of this. So what questions or comments do you have about anything we talked about with regard to payroll protection, or anything new that you've learned since we were together last? Glenn, do you have any insights on that question with regard to the head count and how we see that affecting us?
Yeah, I feel a little more clarity on the head count than I do on this question of the percentage salary reductions, which I just don't think is going to be applicable to us in a variable hour environment where we are typically not reducing people's pay per hour, but they work variable hours routinely. So that's I don't know in the end that one is even going to be applicable to us, or with 1 million of these loans out there, are they really going to go down to an employee level on anything, or are we just going to certify it based on our analysis? But on the head count, in terms of looking at the 2 periods, looking at your average FTE for the 8 weeks, during, where you have to spend the loan proceeds, I feel that's more straightforward. I know there's lack of clarity of whether it's going to be 30 hours or 40 hours. And I still have some questions also with overtime in our business, where overtime in our business is just different. We sometimes choose to, sometimes we have no choice, but it's very different in our business than other businesses. And so my view is, I think, and Dave and I were talking about this the other day too, I'm just going to include the overtime basically in my FTE calculation, and whether it's 40 or 30, I think it's more likely that it's going to be 30. I'm taking my total hours, dividing by 30 for the test period weeks. I'm going to do it during the 8 weeks. I think it's going to be in 2 one-month sections, and that's going to be my average. But right now I'm looking at every week versus the averages in the 2019 period that I've chosen for myself. And I'm just, trying to see how close I am. And it's been close. It's been tough. If the business is shrinking, it's very, very hard.
Good. Thank you, Glenn.
So I have some questions and comments.
Yeah, go ahead,
Can you hear
Tom.
me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so let me kind of throw a couple things to you guys. You know, we use a payroll company, and as you know, if you use a payroll company, like on Wednesday, we pay on a Friday. So you back up to the previous Wednesday, which you do the payroll, which covers really the whole week before. So technically, you're doing payroll. The day they actually get paid is a day that really is involved maybe 12, 13 days, 12 days, 12 to 7 days prior to. And just in a little bit, I mean, I think I have more questions than answers still today. But if it's on a cash basis, not accrual basis, if I started the payroll, I got funded on a Thursday, I paid everybody on Friday, so I've got a big number for payroll on Friday. That covered 12 days of stuff that was accrued pay, but that's counted as a cash basis. So we have to make sure, and then I also thought too on my payroll, if I have to at the end, if I get paid on a Friday, my event is, my eight weeks is going to end on a Thursday. So I'm probably going to do a payroll for 6 days and then payroll for 1 day, so I can at least get all that money in there, and then at least I have it accounted in the system, and then I can actually, you know, take out whatever is not supposed to be there to be protected. The other thing in this business, I mean, my administrative staff, I know who's employed and I know who's not employed because I term them. With this thing, I went back to my HR person. I said, hey, if we use January, February as an end date, she's like, these people are still on our books unless you terminated them for bad behavior. Some of them are like, well, I'll work today. I may not work for a couple months. I'll let you know. So we have a lot of people on our books that really are not terminated that are considered to be employed. And if that's a standard, is like, well, do you have to pay them? You know, we may end up paying a $25 bonus at some point in time to cover these people, so at least we call them on the payroll. But that's a big concern I have is how do you determine if they're actual employees? Do they have to actually earn some wage during a period of time or not? If anybody else has a better idea on that, I'd certainly like to know on that one.
Yes, I think that they're talking about the concept of FTEs. So in our world, people are paid hours in a period, and then dividing that by 30 would give you the FTEs. So we all have people on the roster. We all have different policies on when we take them off the roster, but it's really going to be based on hours worked or hours on call or hours of the vacation hours and sick hours all count too. The only hours that don't count or only dollars that don't count are the over 100 or over 100 annualized or every week or whatever. But also if you're doing if you've waived the exemption, you're doing any sort of COVID related pay that you're recouping, you can't use that for forgiveness.
So you're saying then, Glenn, if they didn't get paid that week, they're not considered to be an employee for that accounting record?
They're not considered an FTE for this purpose, or they're not contributing towards being an FTE for the, you know, they didn't work, so they're not counting as an FTE.
And I'll throw this out. I don't know where I saw this, but last night I was reading something, and I'm like, oh, here's one more thing that kind of contradicts what we just heard, because I was going by the same thing for you is, hey, at least if they're 30, they're considered to be one, and how many of others below 30 have to add up to get one. And in their scenario, somebody basically, this is another accounting firm that said they looked at some judgment ruling or whatever. They said that if you had 5 people over 30, they had more people. If they had 20 people over 30, you'd count them 20. And if you had another 10 people at just 10 hours, they would say that PTE would be counting at each one. If they had hours worked, they would be each one would be counted individually. You would not say, oh, that sum aggregate of your part-time equals, if it gets over the 30 threshold, those 10 people at 10 hours would be not 10 people, they would be 3. According to their analysis, they would be, each person that has 10 hours would each be counted. So it'd be, when they say full-time and part-time, they give each person a 1 for each one. So that's totally different than we talk about the roll-up. So
yeah, I think there's also confusion because when we applied, they asked about head count more for did you qualify, did you have under 500 or meet the other qualifications that kind of let some of these other guys sneak in, versus this calculation, which is really for kind of the percentage of the workforce that you've retained. It's really two different things. But yeah, there's definitely uncertainty out there. I think in general, realistically, whether it's 30 or 40 and you're applying the same methodology or the same divisor, it won't matter. But the thing that will matter is really what you do with overtime. And it, like I said, it may be that they're not going to dig into it. We may just certify based on the fact that overtime is kind of fungible in our businesses where it's not in others.
Yeah, our payroll company is actually supplying us a FTE report as of yesterday. And it matched exactly what our manual report did for the analysis baseline period. So we're adding up. If we have 3 10-hour caregivers, that's 1 FTE. That's 30 hours. So we're using that same formula. They seem to be using that same formula, and they are fairly large, and they're deciphering what's coming from the government. So I think, Tom, that if you just keep, every 30 hours is 1 FTE, and I'm doing what Glenn's doing in our 40 hours as 1 point, whatever it would be, 1.25, I guess, or something, So we're counting them on 30 hours. We're including overtime because at the end of the day, and your stub period, Tom, I think we all have that problem. I'm just going to the fact, my first payroll I paid in May, even though we pay weekly, was for the prior week in April. I'm still counting that as my May. So all my payrolls will be paid in May or in June. And if they question, I'm going to say, okay, so I go back 1 week. The numbers are so close to each other because we don't have huge spikes or up or down. So it's a constant. They just want an 8-week constant. And this way, in the bank account, so.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave, on that. So, and I was talking about, I actually have a 1 week. If those of you that have pay every 2 weeks, that back is even worse. So again, and I've dealt with Medicare so long that there are so many tight rules, and if you don't go by certain things, it's like, well, you didn't go to the letter of the law. So, and this is what my CPA is saying, is that this is so loosey-goosey. Usually we have months to figure out how to implement certain, as Steve knows, in Medicare, it'll be like July, they'll give kind of a preliminary, and then October they'll finalize it, and you have all kinds of software time to get it all figured out. And this thing, it's like, oh, just start going and then figure out as you're going how the rules are played. So
let's just hope.
Yeah, and I'm hoping, and even the other part is, like, I have Chase Bank, and I haven't heard anything from Chase. Are they going to give me kind of a formal template to fill out, or is everybody just going to have their own little, spreadsheet back on people who maybe have $100,000 may end up doing in the back sheet of a paper or a 1-page handout. I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see what's going to be requested.
Well, I qualified with an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to submit an Excel spreadsheet, and I have all the backup data for it. If they want to audit, they can come audit. But self-certification is a wonderful statement in this circumstance. So,
well, in fact, that this is still unclear as a result of the lack of guidance from the SBA. The water is going to get muddied even more so. I just received something this afternoon from our local business publication. It's an article that says nearly half of state attorneys general call for PPP overhaul. And they have a big long list of things that they're unhappy with that the federal government has done. And so they've sort of issued this list of demands and are, I don't think they filed suit yet, but they have their big long list of demands, some of which are quite interesting. Some of them are pretty obvious, like the publicly traded companies that got money. But they're talking about things like eliminating lenders' ability to provide preference to existing business customers, processing loans on a first-come, first-served basis, setting aside a portion of any future funding exclusively for minority-owned businesses, releasing future funds based on metropolitan statistical areas. So if we think it's complicated now, if they start putting some of those kinds of restrictions in, it'll get even more complex. So it's going to be quite interesting. Dale typed a note in the chat box saying, where did those time periods come from? Glenn answered, in the governance. And I presume in the law, there's a reference to making a comparison. So the two particular comparison times are that you can, and I believe you can choose those. Is that right?
You can.
You can,
Yeah, whatever's most favorable for you, whatever period you had the lowest average weekly FTEs. So if the business is rapidly growing, it's most likely going to be 19, but you can choose. I think it's 1106 is the section of the CARES Act that talks about forgiveness, and that's kind of where it lays out the two periods. There's something else in there for seasonal that doesn't really apply to us. It might if you had an agency, that was like, I don't know, Sunbelt or something like that, but I still don't think the seasonal really applies.
okay.
I'm curious if the law,
Stephen?
Yeah, go ahead, Dale.
if the law says payroll incurred and paid, or incurred or paid.
No,
Because
it's and.
it is and.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that was in this summary that I put together from the different law firms. Yeah, they particularly emphasize that it is incurred and paid during the eight-week period. And
if you've incurred the liability, your pay period's ended, but your payday is a week later. You've incurred it, but you haven't paid it, so you can't include it.
that's correct. And what these folks are saying is that may require an off-cycle pay period. And I guess it was Dave was making, or I forget who made a marker. Somebody made a point that if I got my money on Thursday and I had a payday on Friday, and then at the end of the 8 weeks, the 8-week cycle ended on Thursday, but payday wasn't Friday. If I do a Thursday payroll off cycle, then that money gets included in the calculation.
But you have to break your normal pay period cycle.
Well, I think, Dale, there's also the option, if it's close, of just, if you can do it, if you can administratively do it and the payroll company can process it, leave your pay cycle alone and maybe just take a day or two out of the prep cycle if you can. And that might work also if you're like really close, so you're not, because it's going to, there's going to be so many things to explain. There's so many things to explain anyway to our workers that all of a sudden now you're going to have a short period and a long period. And then the next period after the long period is going to be, well, what happened? Why am I not? It's just, I think almost if you can do it, better off just rallying and close the cycle quicker and pay a little sooner if it matters. It is going to be interesting. My original guidance, and I don't remember if this was in the bank or just something else I had read, was that it was the first payroll after you got the money. It's similar to you, I counted my first payroll as the one that was like 2 days after, and my last one is going to be, a week before as the cards fall, so I don't have to worry about that kind of stub. But yeah, some of really the whole first pay period was incurred before I got the money. In my model.
Using that model, Glenn, you would have 8 paydays within that 8-week period, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. Cycle.
And I just left it alone at that. I'm not going to prorate or accrue or anything else, but I basically am finishing a little sooner. My 8th payroll paid falls 5 days before my 56th day from getting the money, basically.
And if you have a good record of the amount that you borrowed and the amount that you have paid, you will know whether you paid the 75%.
I'm looking at it every week, basically. Yeah. So every week I do the calculation of what I paid. I subtract out the stuff that falls under the paid sick and paid COVID stuff. I add back in the state UI and the medical, and I can tell right away that I'm good or not good. But it's the challenge.
So in your example, if your 8-week period ended on a Wednesday, your last payday was on a Friday, and if you were short of spending the 75%, you could do another off-cycle payroll on that Wednesday to add those extra dollars into the.
I think if you did that, I think the spirit of it is 8 weeks. I think if you did that, you might have to trim off some of that stuff in the beginning that didn't really belong, that was incurred first.
Okay.
My
Okay.
really my struggle is the business is shrinking, and there's only so much you can do to maintain payroll between bonuses, paying people to stand by, whatever, things we're trying to do. So I'm getting very close right now, as the business really got hit the last couple of weeks, to stay at the 75. I'm still there, but it's getting harder.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So, a couple of questions I had, Stephen, too. I thought somewhere somebody told me that the banks only had 15 days to reconcile it. That's evidently changed to 60 days to reconcile what you sent to them.
That's a good question, Tom. And I had heard the 15 days as well, but this document says 60. And I'd heard 60 yesterday, so I was getting conflicting numbers.
So another thing too, Glenn, what I was told through one of the NOC conferences, that let's say, for example, you're at the 75% threshold. If you go down to 70% threshold, it doesn't mean you don't qualify. I think there was some language out there that says, oh, you may not be qualified now, you may not get any forgiveness. But according to the person I talked to, they said, well, rather than let's say you were at 70%, you wouldn't get a 30% deduction, you would get a 5% deduction off the 75%. So if that is true, that takes, for me, a lot of burden. Is like that 20. I'll take a 5% hit versus a 30% hit.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't seen any of this in writing, so it just makes it so difficult to assumption. Well, the other part too is my CPA says the expenses are not deductible, tax-wise. Or initially, he thought that they possibly would. So many things are just not defined.
Yeah, I think typically grants, things that you use a grant on, the forgiven loan on, are not deductible in other worlds that get grants. Although it's interesting, I think we heard a couple of things today out of Congress. One, we talked about the Rubio extending the cycle to spend or getting you more money or whatever, but I think there's also noise about it being deductible, but it doesn't make sense that it would be deductible. It's just you're getting free money. Again, you're double dipping for the tax savings on the deduction if you can deduct it. Right.
So the loan does not count as income, and the expenses don't count as a deductible expense.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Pete, who's driving and can't unmute, typed in a question. Has anyone received the $10,000 EIDL in addition to the PPP? And if so, how are you handling that? Does anybody get EIDL money? Bob? Glenn?
Let Bob go. He actually got it. I didn't get it, but I know the answer to the question.
Yeah, Bob?
I got it, and it's supposed to be reducing the PPP by the $10,000.
Okay.
So you can't combine both of them, but
you can't double dip.
No, but so the forgiveness will be less than 10,000 because they've given it to you like in advance.
But the EIDL is a grant, not a loan. Is that correct?
It's a total grant. It's totally forgiven.
Okay.
There's a two-part to that, which I wasn't aware of originally, and we maybe should have been, Bob. When we applied for that grant, we actually got an application number. There's a second phase to the EIDL. The one is the disaster grant, the $10,000, and that is forgiven, but that does have to be deducted out of your forgiveness on a PPP loan. The other side of it is there's another number coming from them. I don't know if anyone's gotten it, and that's a good question. I don't think anyone has. But they are going to be offering us a loan based on the application we filled out for the disaster relief, up to $500,000. And that is a 30-year loan, 3.75%, no payments for a year. And that's like another surprise that's going to be popping up here. I was told, basically now, I guess it's by the end of the month. They said 2 weeks as of Monday.
So Dave, I got an email that said that somebody would be in touch with me.
Exactly.
I didn't even know there was going to be a second part to it, but they did talk about it. And when they first came out with the EIDL, if you recall, when you set it up, you had to create a username, a password, and you had to dump in a lot of documents. And to be honest with you, the thing kept crashing. I don't know for you. I never got all the documents in. So
no, and all that login and stuff went away. That all crashed out, I guess. So then
They
they
did.
launched a new site, and login doesn't seem to work for me anyway. So.
No, but you're right. I mean, for me, I wanted to just see where the thing was going to go for a 30-year loan for 3.75%. I thought it
Yeah,
was
and the EIDL, I tried to get on there after this last conference call, and you can't, there's no more funds left.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's
there,
what I was going to ask about, because I had heard about
Well,
that
that-
EIDL loan, but that they ran out of money because of the PPP program. Is that right, Tom?
Well, I don't know. I think they're two totally separate funded events. But for whatever reason, I think a lot of people were going for at least the grant money, and it basically said is that when I went in there, there's no funds, more funds available, even though they had more allocations to the 2.5 funding.
Okay.
So I did want to add. Go ahead, Tom.
So I think that there's still money left in the PPP, I think, right?
Well, that was what I was going to say. So I sat on a QuickBooks webinar yesterday with.
That was a good one.
You were on it. I was on it too. It was really good. And I came to this Zoom conference late. So you may have talked about it, Dave. Rubio said that there's still over $100 billion left. And if you have not made an application for PPP, you should get your application in. So there is more money on PPP left, a lot of it.
And as far as the EIDL, the disaster relief funds did run out, but these loans are a different bucket.
Yeah.
And those funds are apparently still there. And then, guys, if you don't know, my friendly competitors locally, Tom and Bob, there's the Main Street funds that are coming available this week.
those are for the big guy. Those are for the guys, the $2 million guys, right?
No, it's changed. They've lowered the limit. I have two local banks that are supposed to be getting back to me because they were going to open it up supposedly this week. As to my knowledge, they haven't opened it up. But you got to go back into the bank, do a manual process somewhat. There's no online as far as I understand. And it's a whole nother category, but it's a 4-year loan, no payments for a year. Again, a low interest rate. So there's another piece out there for anyone that wants cheap money.
Yes.
And
What do you
I
think?
love cheap money.
Payments? What interest rate are they looking at, Dave? You know?
I believe it was either 3.75 or less. So
Yeah.
they
If
aren't
you look
clear.
at the disaster loan on the SBA right now, they did allocate additional funds in round 2 for that program.
Exactly.
And for the first couple of weeks after round 2, the website said that it was closed to new applications. They were still processing old applications. Day before yesterday, they've got a new message up that it's only available to agricultural borrowers.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that updated information, Dale. Appreciate it. We're moving up toward the top of the hour. There's one more thing I'd like to take a few moments to talk about this afternoon. And that's caring for clients with COVID-19. And we've been having lots of conversations in our mastermind groups about those agencies that have plans in place and have the PPE and the protocols to care for clients, and those that have said, no, we can't do it, and some that are moving from no, we can't do, yes, we can. And so we have some polling questions that we'd love to get your input on. And there are basically 3 sets of questions. Jill's going to put them up here in a minute. Are you willing and able to care for clients with COVID-19? And there's some choices there. And then if you're not, why not? And if you are yes, what are some of the reasons that you're willing to do that? So I'm going to stop my share, and Jill is going to put up the poll questions. And there we go. So the first question: is your agency willing and able to care for clients who test positive? And there are 4 choices there.
So, Stephen, I do want to say this. Thank you. If you've not talked to Vicki Hoke, this is a really, really big deal for her. that, you know, in that survey that we did at HCOA, that 57%, I think was. So I appreciate you doing this and doing a deeper dive into it.
We're good. Thanks, thanks, Bob. And Jill, do we go right into the second question? Is that how we do that, or is it just the first question showing now?
Yeah, they should all be up.
All three questions?
That's how it was. Yeah, sorry. That's how it was set
Okay.
up.
Okay,
Um,
so
The only
That's right,
little
so
glitch, Jill, is you've got to answer all three, even if two isn't relevant.
okay,
Oh, so you could click other and then.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
okay,
Yeah. Sorry. Huh.
very
Oh,
good. Thanks.
hey,
good to know.
We're learning
Good
this
survey.
process of doing polls, so thanks for your patience with us.
Glenn, did it have you click? Did it have you click through screens? Or
No,
are
it
they
was
all
on one sheet.
page?
You just have to
Okay.
scroll down, but they were all there.
Okay. Good to know.
A few more folks to vote yet. Give you another minute or so.
Getting there. We need Jeopardy music.
Yeah.
Mark, you missed the most exciting point.
I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. Jill has a survey up, so.
While the survey is up, give you another minute to finish. We've got 11 out of 16 who have voted. Mark McDermott asked the question, is any owner who takes a salary, increasing your salary during the 8-week period? Any thoughts about that? Is that
Well,
fit with the intent? Yeah, Glenn, go ahead.
if you increase it above 100, the amount above 100 is not going to count 100 annualized or weeklyized or whatever. So, but
It would be 16,666 that you could take
Yeah.
in those 8 weeks.
yeah,
That's-
but
that's the most you can take
Yeah.
more, but you can only write down that.
yeah, so technically you could start paying yourself up to that amount and have it apply.
I would see it as risky to all of a sudden change your salary and to maximize the forgiveness. But
I think a lot of this is going to be, are they going to go down to an employee level on anything, especially if you have a lot of employees? Are you going to self-certify? Are you below the threshold that they're definitely going to audit? Are you at the threshold they might? I mean, again, it's not like you're going to do the wrong thing. I mean, technically, you can pay someone that amount and have it count towards forgiveness. The optics of something and what other fallout might be could be different, but it's part of it. We've got our risks are far greater too. I think that's part of the whole question about the necessity thing. I mean, we have the risk of our businesses being wiped out by this. If the worst thing happened in the world and the clients all got infected and the caregivers all got infected, we could be at 0 or we could be at 20% of our current business. That's, to me, that is the standard that they set out when this thing was designed.
Yeah, good point.
that's Glenn.
Okay, it looks like everybody's participated in our poll, so we've got the results up there. And so it looks like in our group here, nobody's willing and able to care for new clients. 25% are willing and able to care for current clients. 25% saying we're willing and able, but we don't have any clients. And 50% said we made a decision that we're not able at this time. And so if you're not willing, how come? 8% said fear of infecting a caregiver or a client. 33% said we don't have enough PPE. 25% said we can't get caregivers, and 33% other. And put that in the chat. Glenn made it, or Dale made a note in there. Dale Brock said our state regulators came out and said we have to care for COVID-19. It's our responsibility to take the load off the hospitals. And yes, I'm like, and they have a webinar to explain. So they look forward to more insights on that from next time. And then if you are willing to care for clients, what were your primary reasons? 25% said we have existing clients who need care. 8% were being contacted by potential clients who need care. 8% said we want to help referral sources who have clients who need care. And 58% said others. So interesting thoughts from even our small group here today. So,
hey, Stephen.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, this is
Hey, Andy. How are you?
Singer. I'm well. Good to see all you folks and appreciate you taking time. Hey, as I looked at the poll, I felt like there was maybe a fifth category on that first question where, in our case, in Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, we were not in the sort of early wave, but, and so just, we are evolving through this more a little bit behind maybe some others like Glenn and others in the Northeast in different hotspots. But I think we are, and I've heard from some other folks in our boat, we are willing, we're not yet able, we intend to, and we're moving toward, trying to put some training and some structure in place and maybe developing a separate pay and bill rate for this level of care and, training, I think I mentioned that, but polling our caregivers, trying to gauge their willingness to maybe step into this if they had the right training, still trying to accumulate that level of PPE. We're in pretty good shape on regular PPE, gloves, hand sanitizer, surgical masks, face masks, but getting into the face shield world and the hoodies and the footies and the gowns, that's still taking some time to build up. It's expensive still. And I think we are willing, we're not yet able, and I don't know if there are others that feel that way. I mean, we are treading lightly. We have had a handful of inquiries that have inquired on somebody who's recovered or recovering at home from COVID and would probably be perfectly fine caring for them but there's just enough of that risk that we don't want to have it spread. So maybe I had a hard time kind of finding the right place for me for Senior Corps as an agency to kind of fall in there, but that's just my thought on where we are at least.
Well, that's good, Andy. Thank you. Appreciate that insight. And I think you're right. It's kind of hard to, squeeze all the possible answers into a few choices in the poll question. But as we go back to this question, the Home Care Association of America survey was, have you cared for anyone? I think it was like 8%. And would you be willing? It was only about 43% who were willing, and 58%, 59% said no. And as a result of this survey, Vicki Hoke, who's the new executive director at HCAOA, called me last Friday, and we talked about this, and she asked if I would be willing to moderate a series of 3 live web conferences starting next week to really address this issue. And so we agreed to do that. And so I'm working with a panel, some from our Home Care Mastermind group, some from HCOA, from their Medical Advisory Council. And we're going to do a 3-part series starting on Tuesday, May the 12th, then Tuesday, May the 19th, then Wednesday, May the 27th, all at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the first conference will look at the bigger picture of where are we with COVID and what's happening, and what are the opportunities and threats for agencies, and what are the pros and cons of deciding to go ahead and offer care. And then the second conference with some of our mastermind members as panelists will be talking about what do you need to do to get ready? What are the procedures? What are the protocols? We have some input from the HCAOA Medical Advisory Council. We have some other input from a panel of companies put together by Littler. And then also we'll be looking at sort of the emotional preparation for doing this and what are the risks and consequences, the pros and cons. And then the third session on May the 27th will be about how you recruit caregivers who are willing to go in and take those cases. And so we've got some other panelists who are going to be talking about how you communicate with caregivers, how you educate them, how you train them, how you provide the right PPE, some of those other aspects. So down at the bottom of this is the web link to log in. As you can see, it's pretty long, but if you go to hcaoa.org and click on the store, there is a place to register for this event. No charge, being put on by HCAOA, so, and co-hosted by us, the Home Care CEO Forum. So we invite you to join us for that starting next Tuesday, May the 12th. We were also doing some additional work along with that panel, not only for recruiting and retaining caregivers in caring for COVID-19 clients, but what we need to do to keep our recruiting and retention activities going forward, going back to that headcount question and the FTE question that we had during the PPP discussion. So we'll be rolling out more information over the next couple of weeks around short-term caregiver recruiting and retention and how you get existing caregivers to be willing to care for COVID clients. But we'll have a lot more coming then as we go through the summer about overall recruiting and retention. So that's sort of highlights with some of the things that we're doing around caring for clients with COVID. What insights do you have about that? I know, Glenn, you're right in the middle of the hotspot in the world in Westchester County, New York. I know you've given a lot of thought to this. You're working with us as a panelist on that program. What insights do you have for our group today?
So I guess my focus has been really business improvement as a result of what we've gone through with streamlining, going paper-free, getting more virtual. But at the same time, we have been ramping up in terms of equipment, in terms of procedures. We went through a period very early on where I was probably getting 10 to 15 calls a day, of which 5 might have been bread and butter and 10 might have been people that were actively positive that we just weren't ready for all those reasons. And then the biggest reason is caregiver willingness. We've gotten the equipment and the procedures sorted out. I wanted to save capacity for an existing client that was positive. We've now had a couple of existing and we've taken a couple of new that were, for some of the reasons you laid out around the type of referral source, the type of potential longer term relationship. But really the biggest thing was that out of 190 caregivers, there's probably half a dozen that are willing and it's not always about money. The one guy who has gone into the storm most often was less about money than just the way he's wired.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Other insights on this decision to accept clients with COVID or not and what you're doing to prepare?
I got a comment, Stephen. You know, unfortunately for me, good or bad, I've got 6 RNs that work here in my office, and so we finally secured some N95 masks. And now the biggest challenge is if you're trying to align yourself with what the regulations are, especially with I'm spacing off the name now, OSHA. There is a fit test kit that you're supposed to test. Not only the test, but that goes along with that is a whole medical evaluation. And we're having a lot of discussion. You know, it costs you $50 to $100 to send somebody to go to a doctor to determine if somebody has some breathing challenges, whether it's asthma or they had a broken rib or they had a seizure when they were a kid. So it just starts, if you really are trying to by the compliance with the law, it starts escalating significantly. And so we had that debate this morning, and I basically told him, my other business partner, you got to figure it out because I've got too many other things to deal with as far as the OSHA portion. But maybe we can talk offline or whatever, because that's going to have to be addressed. If either companies are just going to say, we're going to take that risk and do the best we can, which, you know, CDC and CMS are saying that's what you got to do, but OSHA is not giving you that flexibility yet. And even Littler is not giving us we're giving you a pass. So we want to do what's right, but we also don't want to get sued because an employee got sick or another client got sick because of cross-contamination or a vector, and then the good guy gets punished for trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, we're lucky in New York, and I think it's just the density of it is we've got a very active occupational health infrastructure. We use a large provider for all of our medicals, for our drug testing, our physicals, and these types of screenings, and they have a program for the fit test. There's like 30 locations, and it is pricey. It's probably, ironically, one of the few things might be less in New York. It's like $65 for the assessment and then for the test, and all the people that we've sent into the active positives have been fit tested, as well as the nurses. We have 3 nurses as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, great. It sounds like you're on top of that. I'm afraid a lot of people are just going to say, well, we'll give them masks and give them something the best they can, and then that's where I think we have to make sure we educate people when we do this education.
Yeah, the Littler stuff has been huge. It's been very helpful. I was on another meeting of theirs today. They didn't do the weekly home care COVID briefing, but they had an executive HR meeting, and they had an hour presentation by, it's not OSHA, it's some guy in Colorado who's a doctor that all he does is certify medical equipment, and he's looking at, you know, all these different things, and he just lives and breathes this stuff. It does get pretty esoteric, but Littler really does hit you over the head that if you're going to take the positive cases and use the N95 masks and mandate it, you really do need to go through these processes. It's a very uncomfortable thing to wear all day. It's awful.
Yeah. Good. Well, great conversation today. In the chat box, Bob Roth made a suggestion about our topic next week and getting more into helping build awareness for home care. Bob, you want to take a moment and tell us what you're thinking about there and what you'd like to see?
I appreciate it, Stephen, and I appreciate the conversation. We've been talking about PPP and EDILs and everything like that. And, you know, one of the things I just wanted to say, we're still waiting on guidance, and there's still so much information. And as the state's all open, and the state of Arizona is actually officially opening tomorrow, and other states are coming out of this, you know, I think this is a great opportunity for home care. Some of you guys I've seen for a long time. You have the gray hair and the gray beards for a reason. We've been waiting for this time. It's sad that we've lost over 70,000 lives, and, you know, Glenn, a lot of them right there in your backyard, you know, mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts and uncles. But I don't think home care ever in the history of home care has ever had a better time to come out of this thing. Hugely, absolutely hugely. And my question is, how do we do it? We don't want to throw our LTC facility partners under the bus, but the numbers are crazy. And Dave and Tom probably saw this in the Arizona Republic. 66% of the deaths in Maricopa County were from long-term care facilities.
Yeah.
SNFs. So home care is a great option. I'd love to talk about ideas. What are you doing? What are you thinking? Because we're in this like liminal space, what was and what's about to be. And I want us to emerge and just be like the bride of the ball, you know, the belle of the ball. I think it's a great opportunity, and I'd love to hear what everybody's thinking, what you're doing. I think it'd be a great discussion. I think next week would be awesome. So thank you, Stephen.
Well, good.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I would like not to talk about PPP for a session as well. So that would be I got to give a thumbs up to that.
All right, that sounds good to me, and appreciate that. So, Bob, we'll count on you being here next Thursday, and this will fit dovetail perfectly with the work that we're doing with HCOA on that 3-part web conference. So we'll have some new information and thoughts, and so great suggestion, and we'll count on that. Anything else anybody has for the good of the order? Any other questions this afternoon? Hang on, Dale, you're muted. There you go. Yeah.
Hey, Stephen, are you going to share your attorney, your piece of paper, that little cheat sheet you had? It sounds like you're kind of ahead of the curve.
I'm use all the cheat sheets I can find, Tom, to help me figure this out. Dale, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention again, I may have last week, we're still providing supplemental staffing to now 2 facilities through a contact that we made with the emergency management office at the city. The facilities reach out to them and say, we've got too many of our staff quarantined or sick, quit, and we need some help. So they have a resource list. We're on the list. They call us, we get an agreement with the facility. We're only caring for segregated, isolated, non-COVID positive residents. They provide the PPE, which is the same PPE that they use for the positive residents, but we're only caring for the negative, and they've been tested. I've vetted the 2 facilities that we're working in, and I'm going to be a little picky about which one I would go in and not go in. Just the physical layout, I want to make sure that we are truly isolated. And these are memory care. So we've gotten some hours out of it. They see us as a team player. I didn't really aspire to be, looked at as a healthcare hero or anything. I just needed the hours. It came in handy.
Well, that's a good point, Dale. Thanks for suggesting that, because we have 2 clients that we've been working with that came to us, as part of our work. They called up and say, hey, we have a question, can we talk? And they had been approached by facilities to do just that. And they said, how do we do this? How do we write an agreement? We got some sample agreements from some of our mastermind members. And so they've set up a temporary staffing business with these facilities.
Yeah.
And then the question that they will address going forward is, well, do we want to stay in the temporary staffing business, which is really different than the home care business? But there are several of our mastermind group members who have both a home care business and a temporary facility staffing business, and they run them side by side. So
I wouldn't call it business yet, but it's some hours anyway.
Well, it's some hours, and I think there are 2 things that it leads to, Dale. One is building that relationship with those facilities that are referral sources for other home care business. And it does raise this question of what about a temporary staffing part of your company? And there's, I'm a stick to your knitting guy, stay with your knitting and do what you do best. But there are examples of companies that have a very successful home care business and a very successful staffing business. What we have seen in the last, let's say in the first quarter of this year, or first quarter and a half, is that the staffing part of their business has grown pretty dramatically, and the home care business is either stable or up and down, whatever. But,
well, they'll get their first bill next week, and we'll see what happens.
there you go.
Don't bill every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Weekly.
Of course, the downside of the staffing business, facility staffing business, is every customer has on their weekly goal sheet, how do we reduce the use of agency staff? So, it's one of those good news, bad news. But thanks for bringing that up. It is an opportunity.
And I
One
think
quick question on that.
I'll see you next week. I got to run.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bob. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Bob.
Talk to you soon. Yeah, Tom.
With
Thank you.
an employee's mentality, do they like going in there and taking care of 20, 25 patients and running all the time versus that one-on-one? And that's why they come to us, because I think a lot of them just don't like that rat race anymore, because they could go there and get hired any day.
You're exactly right. And one of our members that's in Arkansas that came to us about that, and we got some support for them from some other folks and some guidance. And they had to figure out how to approach their caregivers to see which ones were willing to work in facilities. And what they discovered is that they have caregivers that do home care as a second job, and their primary job is working in a facility. And so they were comfortable with and willing to do that. Whereas you're right, most home care caregivers do home care because they don't want to work in a facility.
These CNAs were idle, Stephen, and they needed hours.
They need
Yeah.
hours, yeah.
And normally we're paying here in our market $11.50 for a CNA for home care, and I'm charging 30 to 35 and paying them 15.
Right. Yeah.
So they like the 15. I am going to try to rotate them back into a home care client and keep them just working the facility as long as that's alive and going. I just don't want to have cross contamination. You know,
Right.
hopefully they don't get contaminated at all, but they are at higher risk over there.
Yep.
No question.
I think, and this is maybe one of the topics for next week, Dale, too. The thing I'm seeing a lot of, I've always saw it a lot, but I'm seeing more of it now, is people looking for care on the independent side of these facilities that don't want to move to assisted. They don't want a different social circle, different dining room, whatever. And there you're direct, in the independents, mostly I'm direct hired, I'm doing med management, I'm able to do some shorter shifts than normal, but it's still that direct model with the client. That's nice. But I think that may be kind of a follow on to some of the stuff you're doing
Yeah.
too on the other side of these buildings or campuses.
Good point, Glenn.
Would
Thank you
have
very
been
much.
locked out of the facility as an agency working for a client there, and now the door's open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is a great conversation, folks. Thanks very much for being with us. We're a little bit past the top of the hour, so we appreciate you hanging around. And we will come back next Thursday at 4 p.m. for office hours, and we will have that conversation. And then we're going to take a little break because I'm going to be traveling the following Thursday, going from Florida back to Kentucky. And so we'll let you know. So thanks, everybody, for being with us. Have a great weekend, a great week. Next week, we'll talk to you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.